Okay, so I had to return my new laptop because it was very slow and it was brand new, yet it was slow, and the computer fan really pissed me off. So I cannot do any edited videos. I can, however, read you a couple chapters in my novel, which I'm going to do now. These two chapters are by no means my favorite. They are by no means my best. Not even close, I don't think. But they are the two shortest chapters I have, so they shouldn't take long at all. And there aren't any spoilers in it. There is one chapter I really want to show you guys, and it's really good. It's my most recent chapter that I wrote, and I'm very, very happy with it. But I'm kind of reticent on doing it because there are a couple songs in it, and the songs are very important to the story, so there might be some future spoilers. That, and I do not have a good singing voice at all, so it would sound horrible. However, the person who does the songs has been tortured relentlessly and is suffering from severe malnutrition. So if I did sing it, it would be pretty accurate on how I want it to sound. So maybe I'll post that as well. So I understand many of you probably won't sit through the whole thing, but for those who do, I thank you, and let me know what you think. Okay, here we go. This chapter is called The Section of the Rod. The rod is actually an acronym, which I'm not going to say what it means, but yeah, I'm not going to say what it means. Here we go. It was dark outside when the group of 6 entered the town of Sheridan in the kingdom of Liongate. Among the group were 4 men and 2 women, all wearing long black robes. The town was minuscule in comparison to other cities and towns in Liongate, but that didn't mean it was uneventful. If it wasn't eventful, the section wouldn't be here. The figures rode on through the town, their horses walking at a leisurely pace, slow and quiet. They didn't want to be seen. Stealth was always preferable to the section. It made things easier and more efficient. If they were seen, they would halt their movements and decide their next course of action. If the mission became too risky, they would return another time and try again. It didn't take long before they found what they were looking for. The group stopped some distance away and studied the hut carefully for several moments. They inspected the area surrounding it, looking for any bystanders. This was when stealth did matter. If they were seen now, they would have to return later. After they were sure they were alone, both women and one of the men got off of their horses and approached the residence. It was better this way, the group knew. People have a tendency to be friendlier to strangers if they have women with them. It eliminates the threat that men portray when they are by themselves or in a group of other men. One of the women knocked on the door and they waited silently. There was no answer at first, so the woman continued to knock. If no one came after the third knock, they would leave and return another time, although this didn't usually happen, especially at this time of night. Finally, they heard footsteps approach, followed by the door swinging open. "Yes? What is it?" It was a tall woman, around 30, with long blonde hair down to her shoulders. "Casey Albright?" said the female who knocked. "Yes. Who are you? What is this?" The woman didn't answer her question. Instead, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a large piece of parchment. She handed it to Casey while the man held a lantern out to give her some light to read with. Casey read the parchment with rapt attention before looking up in bewilderment. "I don't understand." "May we come in?" asked the woman. Casey glanced at the parchment again before nodding reluctantly. She opened the door to let her visitors in. The remaining 3 men, who were far enough away to be invisible to anyone inside the hut, waited a minute before they hopped off of their horses. They grabbed large canteens from their rucksacks and silently circled the house, pouring the liquid all over the exterior surface of the residence. Then they went back to their horses and waited. This part was the hardest for them, as they had no idea how long they would have to wait for. Sometimes it lasted a half hour, sometimes 10 minutes, and sometimes 2 or more hours. If the wait was too long, they would have to re-pour the liquid around the residence, but this usually didn't happen. Fortunately for them, this time only lasted 15 minutes. The front door opened up, and the 2 women exited the residence in a slow but steady fashion. The man followed the women out, closing the door softly behind him. He walked a few feet before bending down on one knee. Then he tried lighting the spark. It took a few tries, but eventually the spark found the liquid and a bright flame crystallized in the night, illuminating the surroundings in a bright orange glow. The man walked back to his horse, and the group continued on their way, the raging fire behind them causing their necks to break out in sweat. The woman who knocked turned back around and studied the flames momentarily, which had now completely engulfed the small hut and was growing in size and shape. No screams erupted from inside the hut. It was deathly silent, except for the crackling of wood burning from the flames. Then the orange flames transformed themselves into a bright purple hue. It started in the middle of the fire near the center of the hut and slowly protruded outward, growing faster and hotter than any normal fire. It was sure to cause shock and bewilderment to all of those unfortunate enough to witness it. Nobody would be able to explain the phenomenon, except for the section of the rod, that is. The origin of the purple flames was a secret only the section knew, and perhaps a few others. In a few minutes the purple flames would disappear altogether, reverting the flames back to their normal state, and leaving many potential witnesses to wonder if what they saw was actually real, or just a figment of their own imaginations. The woman who knocked smiled at the bright purple flames, satisfied that everything went according to plan. Then again, it always did. They had been doing this for a long time, and things always went according to plan. This would cause quite the uproar in the town, the woman knew. Tomorrow's gossip will be on nothing but the devastating fire and how the lives of 3 people, a wife, husband, and their 5-year-old daughter, ended so tragically by the massive inferno. Okay, that was one chapter. Hope you like it. Let me get set up for the second chapter. So this chapter is longer than the other one, and this one's pretty good, I guess. This is one of the very first chapters I wrote when I first began the novel. So, I think I've gotten better at writing since then, but like I said, this is definitely not my favorite chapter, or one of my favorites, but it was one of my first that I wrote, and there's no spoilers, so alright, here we go. Chapter, Brotherhood of Shadows. Who are we, men? The voices answered in unison. We are no one, and everyone. We are shadows on the wall. And what do? We kill. Very good, the Lord Commander said. Line up. 43 men hustled in line and stood at attention. Number 1, are you ready to die? Yes, my lord. Do you want to die? No, my lord. Number 15, step forward. Number 15 stepped forward and faced number 1. They weren't more than 10 feet apart. Number 1, you will not use nightfall. Number 1 nodded. Sword, the commander shouted. A hooded man stepped forward and traded swords with number 1. Number 1's shiny, ceridian steel weapon was now replaced with an old, dilapidated bronze sword that looked like it was trampled on by a herd of buffalo. It had to be forged decades, if not centuries ago. It was far softer and weaker than the steel-bladed weapon number 15 was carrying, which was forged by one of the best blacksmiths in the kingdom and was made for members of the King's Guard. An outsider would frown at this comparison and think the fight was unfair, the commander knew, but an outsider didn't know the players involved. Number 1 was not your normal, average shadow. He was on a whole different level. The Brotherhood were not warriors. They were exceptional fighters, no doubt, trained to use all weapons at their disposal, but you wouldn't see them on a battlefield charging forward sword held high into an enemy's camp. Their skill relied on remaining incognito. They relied on stealth and capricious movements, sneaking up on their subjects and delivering the fatal blow, then melting away in their surroundings, as if they were never there. They were trained to remain invisible, to only announce their presence when absolutely necessary, to not fight unless they had no other choice. The shadows followed these principles of secrecy to perfection, but number 1 was different. He still obeyed directives like the others, but the commander knew that number 1 could just as well be a famous warrior who fought in countless battles. At times it seemed that number 1 was born with a sword connected to his hand, as if the weapon was an extension of his body. The commander was 53 years old. He knew a lot of great warriors in his life. He had fought with some and against some, heard the legends and stories of all the greatest knights in history, of the most dangerous warriors over in Asteria. of the greatest fighters still alive today, but he would put number one up against anyone. Even when the commander was around number one's age, he was nowhere near as talented and dangerous as him. The only way to kill number one would be to ambush him with 3 or 4 others, or attack him unexpectedly, but even then the chances of success were minuscule. He was that good. He was that deadly. The commander stood up straight, and with a loud and commanding voice said, "Begin!" Number one nodded and cracked his neck, then in a flurry of motion began twirling the sword with his hand. Number 15 imitated the process as they began walking toward each other. They were within 5 feet of each other before number one lunged forward, swinging his sword in a high arc over his head. Number 15 met the sword with his own, and the two stared at each other for several moments, their faces contorting from the strain. Number one brought his leg up and kicked 15 in the stomach. He charged again, his hands moving so fast they looked like blurs to the spectators, swinging, thrusting, stabbing, slashing, sending relentless attacks against his fellow brother. They continued their battle, their swords connecting back and forth. The sound of blade on blade seemed to emanate all around them, like a horn blowing in the middle of the night, waking residents from their slumber. Number one delivered another kick to 15, who fell on one knee from its impact. He brought the sword down, but 15 dove out of the way, the sharp blade grazing his face. Number 15 screamed with fury as blood began to pour down his neck. The commander knew it would be over soon. Number 15 was irate, and when you're angry, you lose focus. Number 15 charged, swinging his sword aimlessly all around him. There was no technique to it, no patience. He was letting his anger dictate his actions and was leaving himself open for a counterattack. He should be retreating, catch his breath, and focus on his target. But number 15 couldn't hear the commander's thoughts, and even if he could, even if he did everything right, even if his technique was flawless and perfect, he would still lose. He would still die. It will be soon now, the commander knew. Very soon. Then the moment came and ended in a second. Number 15 brought his sword up high above his head in an attempt to create more force for his next swing. But before he could deliver it, number one stepped forward and shoved his sword straight through the heart of his fellow brother. The commander saw number 15's eyes flicker when he realized his mistake. The look of shock never left him as his body caved in on itself. "You fought well," number one said to the dying man, who was now falling to his knees, his hands hanging limply at his sides. Number one removed the blade and wiped the blood on his opponent's robe. Then he turned and stood at attention for his Lord Commander, who was staring at him with a satisfied smirk on his face. "Very good, very good. You are still my number one." Number one took a bow and went back to his place in the front of the line. The commander addressed the group. "I should have jobs for all of you very soon. Until then, you are not to kill anyone unless you absolutely have to. We are a secret society, and we will keep it that way. Have a drink for your dead brother." The men all nodded. "Number one, you stay behind." Number one nodded. 2 members of the Brotherhood went over to clean up their fallen comrade's body as the rest exited the chamber. The commander watched them wipe away the blood and carry the dead man out of the room. He was a good shadow, fought valiantly and carried out many jobs for the Brotherhood, but a shadow's life is one full of death. These men were trained to accept death as a natural course of life. They knew that they would be forced to fight to the death with their other brothers. If a man can't accept death as a natural cycle in life, then he has no business being in the Brotherhood. Forcing brothers to fight each other was not a common occurrence, however. But since the Brotherhood had over 40 members, losing one of them was not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. If they were down to 20 or even 30, he probably wouldn't have forced them to fight. But they hadn't been that low since about 10 years ago. A few months back, the Brotherhood lost 3 shadows, number 2, number 9, and number 13. They failed in a very important mission. That very important mission, I was actually going to read you to. It was a really long chapter, like 7,000 words, but actually altogether that mission is 3 chapters long, about 25,000 words, which I don't know if I can handle that. My throat would probably die. Maybe in the future. Okay. At the time, the commander had reservations about sending them. He wanted to send number 1 instead of number 9, but something held him back. And due to his mistake, 3 of his men had died. Looking back now, the decision was obvious. Number 1 would have never failed. He should have sent him instead. 3 men would be alive if he had made a different choice. But it was over now, and there was no point thinking about the past. Only a fool frets about what he can't change. He would just have to move on. The Shadows were ranked by their skill level and how important to the Brotherhood they were. The rankings were usually constant, but did change sometimes after a span of a few months. When numbers 2, 9, and 13 died, all other members jumped up a spot. Number 3 was now number 2, number 8 was now number 7, etc. The commander jumped back to the moment at hand. "Number 1, to me." Number 1 approached the commander. "My lord, I have a job for you, a very important one." "Of course, my lord." The Lord Commander of the Brotherhood of Shadows explained his situation. "I can do that, my lord." "Good. How long will it take?" "Depends. Hopefully only a few months." "Good. Very good. If anyone can do it, it's you. I also should have sent you with number 2 and 13 a few months ago. I know you would have been able to do the job." Number 1 didn't respond. "Well, better get to it. Good luck." Number 1 nodded and turned to leave. The commander stayed behind and glanced around the room, admiring the view. The Brotherhood only recently acquired this place. Their normal location was in Arlington, which was east from their current location. That was their headquarters for over a century, long before he was initiated into the Brotherhood. The change in location only happened recently. This was mostly because they had a very powerful client who was high up in the king's government. He gave them a lot of business, and he would soon give them a lot more. So a close proximity to him was beneficial for all parties. They still had a place in Arlington, but they mostly stayed here now, which made communication with their client much easier. The commander didn't trust messenger falcons. Birds can be intercepted, which made it far too risky to conduct business that way. This meant they would have to travel hundreds of miles just to meet with their client to receive the names of those marked for death. A very time-consuming endeavor, which led to many issues arising. The commander smiled. He loved what he did, and he took pride that such an organization could exist with so few people knowing about it. A member of the Brotherhood himself, he was voted as Lord Commander when his master, Carrick, died in his sleep. The commander gave a small laugh. Nobody dies in their sleep. The poison worked quickly and was undetectable. All he had to do was steal it from one of the orderly's chambers and pour it into his master's ale when he wasn't looking. The commander was placed as number 1 almost immediately when he joined the Brotherhood. His skill and experience was something his Lord Commander cherished, which led to his instantaneous promotion. He was also the likely successor to Carrick, so when the remaining members of the Brotherhood discovered the death of their master, he was voted in without opposition. But even if he was opposed, he and his opposition would have settled the matter through fists and swords. That was 14 years ago, yet it felt like it was yesterday. As Lord Commander, he was granted access to the private diaries of all the previous commanders. Scattered throughout the pages was the complete history of the Brotherhood, from its inception to present day. He himself had added numerous entries to it, which would continue to grow as the years progressed. The Brotherhood began 200 years ago when Ragnarok the Terrible sacked Kingstone and declared himself king of all the kingdoms in the realm. He wanted to create a secret guard to help persuade all of those who disagreed with his rule. The Brotherhood was created as the Sons of Ragnarok, a secret group of highly trained, elite soldiers whose only job was to kill. They were mercenaries, well-paid mercenaries. The king himself couldn't kill everyone he wanted to. His power was only as strong as the support he had from the people and those close to him. Fear was a very powerful tool to keep the people in line, but fear can only be utilized so long as the king had faithful followers. If the king did go mad and kill all those he opposed, then he could very well be a common enemy for the people to unite behind. And with this unification, the abdication of his monarchy would have not only been a possibility, but a likely probability. But Ragnarok was smart, and he knew how to hold on to power yet eliminate all of those who opposed him. He paid the Brotherhood well, and they would kill all those who the king deemed as dangerous to his reign. Their primary victims were lords, squires, and knights of the various kingdoms. After the First Status Rebellion and Ragnarok was slain, the Brotherhood changed its name from the Sons of Ragnarok to the Brotherhood of Shadows, not so much for their own protection, but as a new start. There were rumblings from the people regarding their secrecy, and were still rumblings to this day, but most of the people think of them only as a myth, a tale passed on through the generations for no other purpose than to excite those who hear it. But there were still many people who knew about the Brotherhood. These people were in high positions of power where they had access to great wealth. After all, the Brotherhood never acted for free, and their ability to get the job done, no matter who the subject was, gave them room for negotiation. No one, as of yet, that knew about the Brotherhood had ever admitted to its existence to the people of the realm. To do so would surely result in death for them and their loved ones, but it was still a possibility and a threat the Brotherhood had to deal with every day. If the commander's diary was to ever be discovered, the secrecy of the Brotherhood would be destroyed and the Brotherhood would be arrested and executed. The commander never had a doubt about this. What those pages contained was a list of all the people the Brotherhood was hired to kill, when they killed them, and how they killed them. It even delineated the various tactics the Brotherhood used to cover themselves from being exposed while framing others for their deeds. They were infamous for creating smokescreens. In fact, the Havarian Civil War of the year 106 was orchestrated by the Brotherhood, and its impact is still present today. The Havarians and their brothers of Harvest Peak were still at war with one another. The Brotherhood was highly successful in their operations, and very soon they would be creating discourse and civil unrest that will completely change the landscape of the continent. The commander is waiting for the word of his employer, and once he received it, the realm would surely change, and a powerful, ancient family would be destroyed forever. But none of that mattered to the commander. As long as he and his men got paid, he didn't care about the consequences of his actions. His only job was to kill, and the Brotherhood were masters at death. The time would be soon. The only question was how many of his men would complete their tasks, and how many of them would die by the hand of another. Okay, well, there we go. Again, not my favorite chapters, not my best written chapters, but I think they are decent chapters, and they kind of give you some insight about a couple plot arcs. One of the plot arcs is a section of the Rod, and this one is Brotherhood of Shadows. The Brotherhood of Shadows will play a big part in the first book and future books, like a big, big part. So it's pretty important, and I didn't want to give too much away in this chapter, so you will learn more about the Brotherhood in future chapters and its specific members. So if you stayed through the whole thing, thank you, and let me know what you think. And I'm done.